What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by Daniel Starkand. And look, we got a new vibe in here. We got headlines. We got an agenda down at the bottom. Daniel's got gel in his hair. Things are looking up for us, Daniel.
No gel in the hair. I'm actually way overdue for a haircut. But yeah, things are looking up. I like the new background. Unfortunately, I missed the 2020 champs, but it was time to finally move on. Let's start the new era by talking about a little Dodgers infield today, or lineup overall, I should say.
Yeah. So today is going to be the first in a series of videos that Daniel and I are going to do over the coming weeks, which is kind of looking ahead to the 2022 roster and where the Dodgers stand. So we'll do one on the bullpen at some point. We'll do one on the rotation at some point. But today is on the lineup. It's on the bench. It's on the guys that are out in the field and where the Dodgers stand. So, Daniel, as we jump into this, let me throw a couple questions at you. The first one is a headline that comes from Jeff Passan as of last week, which was, there's an expectation that before the December 1st collective bargaining agreement expires, before there is a lockout, which most people seem to assume is what is coming, there is a belief that guys like Corey Seager and Marcus Semien could actually sign before then. When you hear something like that, do you have a sense of, is that a good thing for the Dodgers or a bad thing, or it doesn't matter?
I'd say probably a bad thing, just because it means that they're getting offers like now and offers that could potentially be good enough to be accepted. And who knows, maybe in Seager's case, that offer is from the Dodgers and he wants to stay. They want him back. They're negotiating right now and they'll be able to come to a quick agreement. But honestly, like, who knows? I just think at the end of the day, it's good for fans, I'd say, because like I was kind of nervous, like with this whole lockout situation, that we might not see guys signing till January, February, March, as we've seen in the past, like spring training starting and like the 3 top free agents still haven't signed yet. That's not fun for anybody. So just that we're hearing it's possible. We got the first, I'd say, big signing of the offseason today, Eduardo Rodriguez to the Tigers, 5 years, $77 million. So it seems that teams are willing to throw out some money right away, which is good, because that should be able to get things moving even before all that lockout stuff starts in December or whenever.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like, people are like, oh, we're hearing news on Seager, and it just, to try and cut through the noise this time of year is so difficult. Like, is this Scott Boras just wanting to try and convince the Dodgers that there's 6 other teams currently bidding for him? Or are there actually other teams bidding for him? Obviously, Bill Plaschke's got the Carlos Correa headline out there, which we will talk about in a little bit. There's a video up on Dodger Blue, our YouTube page, if you want to check out Trevor and Matt talking about that. Daniel and I will chime in once we get to the free agents portion of this. But again, to me, is that somebody feeding Plaschke info because they want people to believe that the Dodgers might actually go after Correa? Obviously, Plaschke's plugged in, so presumably his source is within the Dodgers organization. Who knows who that source is? Who knows if maybe it's just a made-up thing. I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but it just seems crazy enough to be out there. So here's the plan for today. Obviously, you can see our agenda bar at the bottom. We're going to work our way through that. We'll start with who is currently on the roster. If the season were to start today, who do the Dodgers have? And I'll spoiler alert this a little bit. They're going to be very good in 2022, regardless of what they do in free agency. We'll talk about specific lineup needs the Dodgers have. Then we'll get into the free agents, both who the Dodgers have, like Corey Seager, Chris Taylor, etc., but also who's out there. Are there names at the high end of the market, at the low end of the market that Daniel and I are interested in? And then we'll make some predictions about the 2022 lineup, whether it's guys we think they'll sign, guys we think who will improve, etc., etc. One other bit of housekeeping, Daniel, before we get going, because one thing looming over this conversation of lineups in 2022 is the designated hitter. We are both still under the assumption that that is going to be part of the new collective bargaining agreement, that when this is renegotiated, that this is one thing that everybody wants. Pitchers don't want to hit. Agents want more at-bats for guys that are good because that means more money for them. Teams don't want their pitchers hitting because they don't want pitchers to get hurt. It's better for the game of baseball, presumably, from a run-scored perspective. Obviously, if you're a traditionalist, you would say it's bad for the game of baseball. But are you hearing the same thing, that the DH is still maybe not something that we should completely bank on, but is more likely than not to be even in the National League in 2022 and moving forward?
Yeah, it's something that I haven't really seen talked about recently, but I think that's just because everyone's under the same impression, like you just said, that the DH is coming. Like there's really no downside for either side. Like you just kind of laid it all out. It kind of benefits everyone. Pitchers don't want to hit, like they get hurt when they hit. and they don't hit very well
Yeah.
typically. And having the DH allows for more at bats for position players. It allows guys to get off their feet and rest every now and then, to stay healthy, which I think is in the best interest of everyone. So yeah, I'd say it's coming. It's not obviously not for sure until they go to the negotiating tables, and as we've seen in the past with MLB, who knows? But I definitely think it's in the best interest of everyone to have a universal DH. So I'm expecting it to be here for sure.
Yeah, it's like that. Just because it's good for everyone and it seems
Yeah.
to be obvious doesn't necessarily mean Major League Baseball is going to make it happen. So,
Definitely.
okay, well, let's get into it. Let's talk about the Dodgers 2022 roster. And when you look at this roster, again, I have to be honest, it's really impressive, even with no Corey Seager, even with no Chris Taylor. If you look down right now, currently, the Dodgers would have Will Smith playing catcher, Max Muncy at first base, Gavin Lux, I've got slotted in at second base. Trey Turner at shortstop. Justin Turner at third base. A.J. Pollock in left field. Cody Bellinger in center field. Mookie Betts in right field. Your bench, as far as DH guys, you've probably got Edwin Rios, maybe Sheldon Neuse if you wanted to do a platoon guy. Neuse is kind of the only right-handed bat the Dodgers have on the bench right now. They've got Beatty, Rex, Raley, McKinney, all left-handed hitters. All of those guys are currently under contract, currently on the 40-man roster. Austin Barnes also, excuse me. Apologies to the Austin Barnes Hive.
Pitch hit specialist in the postseason.
Yeah, excuse me. Definitely should have been included as the de facto designated hitter. I mean, there is very few things he does better than hit. But yes, the current bench would be Rios, Beatty, McKinstry, and Barnes. Plus, you've got Neuse, Rex, Raley, and McKinney. So McKinstry, I should say, is another guy to be included there. So when you look down this list, again, quickly, Smith, Muncy, Lux, Turner, Pollock, Bellinger, Betts, and then Rios, McKinstry, Raley, Beatty, kind of in the DH spot. What's your immediate reaction to that group?
I'd say my immediate reaction is that it's a good start. Like if you had to go into the season with just that group, I wouldn't say you're feeling great, but you're feeling pretty good. Like you still got stars all over the place. I'd say the bench is the glaring weakness there, and obviously in a full 162 game season, you can't just expect your 8 starters to stay healthy all the time. So you need some depth. You need some bench guys who could come in and start if need be, which the Dodgers have always had, like whether it be Chris Taylor, Kike, Jock, like all those guys who are starters on every team, as we saw this past season with the guys that left, like they became everyday players and kind of shine. So I definitely think there's moves to be made, but it's definitely a good start for sure.
Yeah, and it's funny because as I'm chatting with you about this, I think back to last season and how everybody seemed to be disappointed in the regular season the Dodgers put out, and it was simply because they were comparing it to the Giants' regular season, which obviously was just slightly better. The Dodgers tied the franchise record for wins, with second best win percentage in franchise history, et cetera, but all we couldn't get the Giants out of our head. I look at this group, and when I hear you say, hey, it's good, it's not great, I think we're doing the same thing. Like, if you look at this roster, Trey Turner and Mookie Betts are two of the, 10 to 12 best players in all of baseball on the offensive side. You've got Will Smith, who's the best catcher in baseball. You and I both think that. You have Max Muncy, who is an elite hitter. You've got Cody Bellinger, who knows, like a former MVP, who's like the 5th guy we're mentioning in this roster lineup. You've got A.J. Pollock, who played at an all-star level last year. You've got Justin Turner, who hit at an all-star level last year. And then you've got Gavin Lux, former top prospect, who actually hit really well. So I hear you on the depth piece, but from just strictly, like, if the Dodgers walked into the season with this, I think this would be one of the best lineups in all of baseball already, with Trey Turner, with Mookie Betts, with Will Smith, and Max Muncy. Like, those 4 guys, how many teams in baseball can boast 4 hitters that can match up with those 4 guys specifically? And I'm not even mentioning Pollock, who was great last year, Bellinger, who complete wild card, Gavin Lux, et cetera, down the line.
Yeah. And let me be clear. I'd say the top 8, what their starting lineup would be is definitely elite. My where I take exception is just with, like, let's say Justin Turner goes down and like gets hit by a pitch and breaks his wrist and is out for 2 months. As of now, then Sheldon Neuse is becoming your everyday third base. Edwin Rios. Okay, but Edwin Rios is probably the one bench bat you trust at the moment and would be your DH as the season starts today. And if he becomes your everyday third baseman, then your DH is messed up and you have no bench. So I definitely think the top 8 are elite. You just you need more than that, I'd say.
Yeah, and I mean, to be clear on Edwin Rios, this is a guy that people are high on, and he was going to be a talking point for me here, which is how do we feel about Rios? Obviously, this past season he plays in 25 games, makes 60 plate appearances. He was terrible. He hit
Yeah.
078. Now, I think the optimistic view of this is, well, he was hurt. He was trying to play through it. He ended up getting shut down because he just couldn't do it. You look a season before, he hits 250 with a 645 slugging percentage in 83 appearances, 617 slugging percentage in 56 appearances. So on one hand, we're talking about a guy who has less than 200 plate appearances in his major league career. I know the home run numbers are there, 13 home runs and 200 plate appearances. But when we talk about Edwin Rios, this is obviously a guy that they missed last year, left-handed hit batter, off the bench, a guy that you felt like you could trust. You compare that to the McKinneys and the Rayleys of the world, and you feel good. But how optimistic are you that Edwin Rios' problems last year were entirely related to, I believe, the shoulder injury that sidelined him for the rest of the season?
Yeah, I think you could just kind of throw away last year. Like, I don't know if the struggles were entirely related to the injury. I bet it had something to do with it, but it was also the guy was just in a slump, like, and it was a small sample size, and it just happened to come right at the beginning of the season, so the overall numbers just look awful. But I think, like, as we've seen with so many other guys, like, if Edwin Rios would have kept playing the full 162 game season, like, he would have came out of that at some point. I also don't think it's fair to look at the previous numbers, which are really good, and expect that guy. Like, I think the real Edwin Rios is somewhere in the middle there. I think he's someone, you know, you could give at bats to against right-handed pitching. Like you said, he's a left-handed bat. I don't know if he's an everyday player, but if he's one of your bench bats who's starting a couple times a week, I definitely think he could contribute to winning baseball. I don't think it's fair to look at the 22 game sample from last season or whatever and say, you know, this guy is awful just because of the injury, and also just because it's such a small sample that if he didn't get hurt, there's just absolutely zero chance the full season numbers look anywhere close to that. So even Cody Bellinger numbers were a step up from what Edwin Rios was doing.
It's true. And that's what I like. Is like you can look at 2019 and 2020 and say, hey, don't pencil him in for a 950 OPS for the rest of his career. And then you can also look at 2021. Also, don't pencil him into a 350 OPS or whatever he put up last year as well. So obviously the free agents here for the Dodgers, guys that are not factored into the conversation we just had, would be Corey Seager, Chris Taylor, and then Albert Pujols when you're talking about bench bats. Just some notes. I love MLB Trade Rumors. They do a top 50 free agents and some predictions, and as far as dollars, I like it because it's just an unbiased group of people throwing numbers out there. They project for Corey Seager a 10-year, $305 million contract. They predict him to go to the Yankees for what it's worth, and they also have Chris Taylor, 4 years, $64 million. For him, Pujols did not crack the top 50, so there's no numbers for him. But those are the three guys that are gone, which leads to our third piece here, which is the needs of this Dodger lineup. We just talked about it. I list the two needs below as a middle infielder and as a bench bat. You've got Trey Turner, you've got Gavin Lux, who we still haven't seen put it together for an extended period of time. We got a month of really good offensive production last year. But even defensively, he had moments at the beginning of the year where like, hey, this guy could play shortstop, and then that kind of regressed. So I've got a middle infielder of some sort, a guy that can at least provide depth in the middle infield, and then offensive firepower on the bench. I would say, looking at the current construction, those would be my two big needs. Anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I'd say you probably need to add another outfielder as well, and some of these could overlap. Like if you sign if you resign Chris Taylor, he
checked every box.
Like just him alone, he fills all of these. But I'd say, as things currently stand, you listed kind of their depth guys, and in the outfield, they were all left-handed bats. And I know none of them are that good, but maybe you could at least hope one or two of those guys could be, decent in like a smaller role. But I'd say you probably need one more right-handed bat in the outfield. I know you're going into the season with basically three everyday outfielders. I'd say, like, obviously Mookie's in right. I think we're both under the assumption that Cody's going to be back and starting in center. I doubt they trade him when his value is as low as it was, and he kind of turned some stuff around in the playoffs where you're at least a little bit optimistic. And then AJ Pollock, coming off a great year, kind of put some postseason demons to bed. I think you feel pretty comfortable going into the season with him as your starting left fielder. But at the same time, there's injury concerns there. There's not guys you could trust behind them. Like you could hope that whether it be Rayleigh or Rex, or like you could hope some of those guys could turn into something, but I don't think you could just count on it, as we saw
Yeah.
last season when they were counting on a couple of those guys to do something and none of them did anything. So yeah, I'd say definitely middle infield is probably the biggest one, just because Lux is still a question mark. And B, Trey Turner, as of now, is still only signed for 1 more year. So, yes, you could count on him being your everyday shortstop, but I don't think that's, as of now, it's not the long-term solution yet. It might become that. We'll see. But I definitely think, they're going to have to add some utility, at least one utility player.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just re-signing Chris Taylor. Maybe it's bringing in someone for cheaper. But yeah, I'd say middle infield, bench, and bench bat. And some of these, obviously bench bat can be a middle infielder or an outfielder. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the guys that they currently have under contract, the bench bats are Rios, Beatty, Rex, Rayleigh, McKinney, McKinstry, and Noisy. So, again, Rios, Beatty, Rex, Rayleigh, McKinney, McKinstry, and Noisy. Those are kind of the offensive guys that they currently have on the 40-man roster under contract. We talked a little bit about Rios. We think that's a competent Major League Baseball player as a floor. Like, he's a guy that, basically gives you Pujols level production, I would imagine, as a baseline. Somebody who comes in, he's got power, he's got pop. You've seen him do it at the Major League level. Beyond that, McKinstry, like, where are you at on McKinstry? Because he's another guy that, in theory, checks a lot of the boxes that we just talked about. Right. He could play the outfield. He could play a little bit of infield, probably second base, not shortstop. But where are you at on McKinstry specifically? Because I think of all the other guys there, we kind of know what Matt Beatty is. A solid bench bat, can play a little bit of outfield, a little bit of corner infield. Rex, Rayleigh, McKinney, Noisy, those guys are complete question marks. But McKinstry stands out to me in that group. What do you make of McKinstry? What's your sort of optimism for him moving forward?
Yeah, I'd say I'm definitely not out on McKinstry. I think he's flashed his potential. Like, he's shown at times like he could be exactly what the Dodgers need. Like you said, a guy who could play multiple positions, a plus bat.
Yeah.
But I just don't think he's someone you could like go into the season like counting on, like pencil him into the opening day roster, pencil him into that utility Chris Taylor type role and expect to get similar type production. Like, yeah, maybe you'll get that. Like, he started off last season great, but then he gets injured and never really quite got back on track. So it's possible he needs, maybe some more minor league seasoning. And I think in a perfect world, maybe he's a guy who doesn't make the opening day roster, starts the season at AAA, and then as soon as injuries start happening or whatever, he's a guy you could call up and he could fill in at multiple positions. Like, I know he's not great defensively at any of them really, but he's passable at least. Yeah. And I think the bat, we've seen him hit the ball really well. Like, I think the bat could get there. So I'm still optimistic about McKinstry. I just don't think he's someone you could go into the season like 100% counting on him to be on the active roster the whole season and to give you, above average production.
Yeah, I think the defense was the big sort of eye opener for me. Like, we had seen guys, and I've said this multiple times, but we had seen Keke Hernandez, we had seen Chris Taylor not only be utility guys, but be above average to elite defensively at all of them. And so I think as Dodger fans, we just got spoiled as in like, well, if you're a utility guy, then you must be good at all these places. I mean, Cody Bellinger, Max Muncy, all these guys, like, you add a second position, they're all very good at them. McKinstry comes in, it's like, oh, he's actually not good at any of these positions defensively. Like, he's at best league average. And so that's where it's like, well, it's nice that you can play left field. It's not going to be a good left field. It's nice that you can play second base. It's not going to be a good second base. So interesting to see there. Because I'm with you. I mean, he was a guy that you and I were both high on going into the season. All the reports about him were, hey, this guy's making a jump. We saw it. Then he gets hurt. So I'm optimistic, but I agree with you that he's like at the top of the list of those other guys. Again, outside of Rios and Beatty, because I kind of know what I have there, I feel like. But he's the next guy that could make a jump. That could be better than both of those other two guys. But I don't want to build my 2022 roster on the assumption that he's going to be there. I think, would you say that aside from him, Noisy, Rex, Rayleigh, McKinney are all guys that you just sort of like lottery tickets? Hey, if they work out, great, but you're not banking on literally anything from any of those guys. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like, I think some of those guys have, they were, I don't want to say top prospects, but they had a prospect status at one point. There are guys who were kind of, you'd think they could come up and be, a competent bench player, start a few games here or there and produce, but just literally none of them did last
Yeah.
season. So I think those guys are better just as depth pieces. Like, injuries are going to happen throughout the season. Like if someone goes down and they have to call up Rayleigh for a couple weeks, I think it's passable. But I just don't think you could rely on those guys to be, not everyday players, but like even like just straight up like opening day roster bench players. I don't know if they've proven enough that you could just rely on that.
Yeah, and it's worth adding, we're going to have a conversation with Justin Lorber here at some point in the next couple of weeks, but I think it's safe to say that there aren't really any Dodger offensive prospects that you can pencil into 2022. I know people like Michael Busch. There's some other guys in that group, Cody Hosey, etc., but none of those guys are really banging down the door. And so my sense from right now is there's not anybody that you should feel confident about in 2022, maybe later in the season as a call-up type of a thing, but we will see. So just to recap this, outside of the top 8 that we feel good about, Austin Barnes, who obviously will be the backup catcher, I have Rios and Beatty as kind of like lock might be a strong word, but strong consideration to lock status to be on the bench next year. McKinstry would be the next tier of kind of either last guy on the bench or first guy called up after that, and the rest of them are just like probably minor leaguers that are depth pieces. Agree or disagree with that assessment?
Yeah, that's fair. I'd say in my eyes, Billy McKinney is with those other guys, but I'd say maybe in the Dodgers' eyes, they might have him a little ahead of those other guys.
Yeah.
I still don't understand why, but I'd say that would be the only thing I'd add to what you just said.
Fair. All right, well, let's get into the piece of this that I think most people are most excited about, which is offensive free agents, and you see the headline there. Would the Dodgers actually sign Carlos Correa? You and I did not have a chance to talk about this yet. Obviously, if you're new to this, Bill Plaschke put out an article saying there are people in the Dodger organization that are interested in Carlos Correa. I believe were the words, and I think I believe were the words that he used, and I think he kind of doubled down on it and went back and checked and said, yeah, no, like there's people in the organization. Now, as some folks have noted, who are those people in the organization? Like, is Dieter Rule, the organist, interested in Carlos Correa? Like, is it the ticket?
Probably not.
Is Bill Plaschke's ticket sales agent maybe interested in signing Carlos Correa? Maybe they moved from Houston and big Carlos Correa fans. I don't know. But Carlos Correa is at the top of the list when it comes to conversation pieces. And so, briefly, Daniel, would the Dodgers sign Carlos Correa? Do you think on a scale of 0% chance to 100% chance, where would you put this one?
I'd put it at like 5% just because it's like a never say never type of deal, but I don't see it happening. Not only do I think the Dodgers wouldn't sign him, I don't know, something no one's talking about is why would he want to sign with the Dodgers?
Yeah.
Like I know I feel like it's been talked about over and over again why the Dodgers wouldn't sign him and shouldn't sign him. But just looking at it from his perspective, like he cussed out the Dodgers, he tried to fight Joe Kelly. He got booed crazy by the fans when he came here. Like, why would, when he's going to be getting offers from a bunch of teams, like, I don't think he might not get all the offers he wants, but I still think he's going to get quality offers from a lot of teams. So why would he choose the Dodgers over, say, the Yankees or whatever other team? So I just don't see it working for either side, to be quite honest. So I get like why people are bringing it up. It gets people thinking, it gets people talking, that's for sure. But I feel like 99% of Dodger fans are all on the same page here that, if you're going to give all that money to Correa, just go give it to Corey Seager instead, or Trey Turner instead, or someone else instead. Max Scherzer, Clayton Kershaw. Like I could list you 20 free agents that I'd rather they sign before Carlos Correa. And that's honestly, I'm not even talking about Carlos Correa, the player, because he's a really good player. And if you add him to this Dodgers team, that definitely makes them better. There's no denying that. But I just don't see how it would make sense, for off the field reasons, for clubhouse reasons. Like, think about if the Dodgers go out and give Correa $300 million. Well, that means there's other guys in that clubhouse who are due to be free agents in the coming years. Who they're not going to be able to pay because Carlos Correa is making all that money. So I guarantee they wouldn't be happy about that. And I just don't see how it works regardless of what Bill Plaschke wants to say.
Yeah, I think you touched on the three biggest ones. A is, why would he want to come to a place where he's going to get booed continuously? Like, how much money is that worth to you? Are you really going to take, if the Dodgers, even if they were going to give you $10 million over 10 years, like, is that worth it at that point? Would you rather just go play somewhere where you're going to be a hero no matter what? That's point number one. Point number two is, yeah, that the Dodgers would have to make this move at the expense of a beloved player in Corey Seager. So it's not like when they go out and sign Trevor Bauer and there's controversy around it. But there wasn't like well, because you signed Trevor Bauer, now we can't pay Clayton Kershaw or whatever. Like it was Bauer or nobody. So there was no opportunity cost. With Correa, the opportunity cost has a name and has a face, and it's Corey Seager, and he was the World Series MVP, and everybody loves him. So that's the second piece. But the third piece that you touched on that I haven't heard enough people mention, Andrew Friedman and Dave Roberts care deeply about the culture and the clubhouse. Like when you look back on guys they have signed and why they have signed them, so much of it is about, hey, we're going to re-sign Justin Turner because we like the clubhouse. We like the leadership. We like the way that it's built. And so why would you risk throwing a wrench into all of that with a guy like Carlos Correa? Again, it's not just somebody that has had bad blood, like in theory. This is a guy that Bellinger clapped back at him, and then Correa clapped back at the Dodgers. And like there are names and faces associated with who the people are who don't like him. Now, Joe Kelly might not be a Dodger, so I guess that's one piece that might not be there. But it's not like Joe Kelly was on an island when he did what he did. Like he had the support of everybody in that clubhouse. And so I'm with you. It's a never say never scenario. I just think you look at the track record of Andrew Friedman, and I know that Correa, you could make a compelling argument, is the best shortstop out there. MLB Trade Rumors has him as the number one free agent, 10 years, $320 million is the prediction. I'm with you. I mean, 5% even sounds high, but I get it. Like, I just don't see it. So much would have to go wrong. Like, so much would have to happen at a discount or something for this to make sense. And so I just don't see it. Now, if you don't.
And then also, one thing we also haven't brought up is if, let's say you do go out and sign Correa for all that money, then what do you tell Trey Turner? Like, hey, sorry, you could stick around for another year, play second base again, which I know you hate, but we'll let you do that, and then you could walk elsewhere. Like, what? He's just gonna be miserable for a year. What are you gonna try to trade Trey Turner? Like, I've seen people suggesting that. I think that would be a horrible idea. So I just don't see why it matters. Like, I think a lot of people are under the impression that if the Dodgers don't re-sign Seager, that they have to go out and find another shortstop to replace him. And I just think that's lunacy. Yeah. Like you have another shortstop in Trey Turner. Like, yes, you'd probably have to go out and get another bat of some sort to replace him, but it really does not need to be a shortstop. Yeah. And in fact, like it would make more sense to get someone with versatility who could play multiple positions, not a guy who's only played shortstop in his career.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I think that's sort of the second piece of this is you have a shortstop. And we did the exercise when we did our free agency primer. Trey Turner is better than all of the free agent shortstops in a lot of the metrics. I mean, defense is the one metric, but if you look at wins above replacement, if you look at weighted runs created plus, if you look at OPS, Trey Turner is the best of all of these guys when you look at that category. So it can't be forgotten. And you make a good point is they have a backup plan there. And you could argue they have two backup plans if you want to count Gavin Lux as well, and then Chris Taylor floating around. So some other free agents to mention here that are interesting names. You mentioned you want some versatility. How about Chris Bryant is a free agent, a guy that could play left field, a guy that could play center field, a guy that could play third base. Obviously, we know he can hit. MLB Trade Rumors has him projected 6 years, $160 million. Marcus Semien, if you wanted to go the shortstop route, 6 years, $138 million. They had one person predict the Dodgers as a team that might be interested in signing him. Of course, the Dodgers were interested a year ago, ended up not getting him. Trevor Story, the other shortstop on the market, 6 years, $126 million. So just $21 million a year for Trevor Story on a 6-year deal compared to 30 or 32 for Seager and Correa. That's fascinating to me. Even Semien, who's much older than Trevor Story, is getting more on an average annual value there. So just talking about, you say, hey, if it's not Seager, to be clear, you're not interested in Correa. We know that for all those reasons. Marcus Semien, Trevor Story, 6-year deal, $20 to $25 million range. Either of those guys interesting to you, or you say, hey, it's either Corey Seager or bust at the high-end shortstop market?
I mean, I definitely think those guys are good players, and especially with the Story one, like those numbers are less than I was expecting. Like, I know he's not coming off his best year, but I still think of him as like an all-star elite type player. And I like Semien a lot. He was a guy who I thought the Dodgers should have signed last year, especially it was just a 1-year deal. Like, there wasn't a whole lot of risk there, and he ends up putting in an MVP type of season. Like, looking back, I bet they're kicking themselves about that one. But I definitely would be interested in all those guys. I think Chris Bryant is an interesting name just because he brings versatility to the table, which we know the Dodgers love. Like, you could play him at third, could play him in the outfield, you could play him at first. He's kind of like a Chris Taylor type of player where you're filling a lot of needs with just one signing. And I know he's probably going to be making more, than Chris Taylor. So that's why I'd probably say Chris Bryant's not super likely, just because I think you'd rather just sign Chris Taylor for less than that aid, because we already know what we're getting with Chris Taylor. They know the fans love Chris Taylor, and that would allow you to make some more moves as well. And I think there's other names out there, like as far as utility needs. Like, I think Mark Canha is someone who I don't know how much he's going to get paid, but I definitely think there's going to be a lot of teams with interest in him. I saw a tweet the other day that was like basically player A, player B with the numbers from the last like 3 seasons
I love
or whatever.
me a mystery player A and mystery player B. That is like, I am in on that bit every time.
And it was Mark Canha and Chris Bryant, and the numbers were pretty much identical. And like, no one ever talks about Mark Canha. He gives you versatility. He could play multiple positions. Another guy, Donovan Solano from the Giants, is someone who I wouldn't be surprised to see the Dodgers have interest in. He's been in the organization before. He gives you versatility. Like, there's a ton of guys out there, like a ton of cheaper options. So I think if you're not getting if you're not re-signing a Seager, I don't think you need to panic and be like, all right, let's give Marcus Semien all this money to replace him. Like, I think you could kind of piece it together, maybe sign 2 or 3 guys that add up to the amount that Marcus Semien would make, and you could get similar production. Like, if it's Chris Taylor, Donovan Solano, and like one other guy or something, where no, you're probably not getting an all-star season out of those guys, although we saw Chris Taylor can put together an all-star season, or half of a season at least.
Half of an all-star season.
But you're filling a lot of needs, and then you don't have to rely on those depth guys that we just talked about as much. I'd say that's probably a better plan than just going out and giving Semien or Story like a big deal, even if it's not as much as Seager. But I just think there's so many options on the table for the Dodgers, which is a good thing. Like, we talked in past videos how they do have some leverage as far as the Seager situation goes, and I think just all the names we're throwing out there as possibilities shows that.
Yeah, and the reason I started with here's the 2022 roster is because I hope people are watching and recognizing the Dodgers are operating from a position of strength, right? You could look at their starting pitching rotation and say they're desperate, and I think that's like a fairly accurate assessment. I don't think they're desperate in the bullpen, and they're definitely not desperate when it comes to the lineup. And so I think it's fun to talk about Correa and Bryant and Semien and Story and Nicholas Castellanos, another guy that's projected to make 5 years, $115 million, is a guy who's probably a DH, but who freaking smashes the ball. But I think it's important to note from the get-go that the Dodgers are operating from a position of strength. If the Dodgers said no to Corey Seager for whatever reason, I think if Chris Taylor were the highest average annual value bat that they went out and got, somewhere in that $16 million range, that's fine. Like, they don't need to replace Corey Seager with Semien or Story or Correa or Javi Baez. Like, they don't need to. Because they went out and replaced him already to some degree by trading for Trey Turner last year, who, by the way, is going to make a bunch of money in his last year of arbitration. But I think that's just an important piece to note, is that we are used to the Dodgers going big game hunting at all stages. And yet the beauty of doing that is that then at some point you build a roster that you can have some attrition. And somebody made a good point. They're saying, if Seager were to leave, would he be kind of the first homegrown prime level guy to leave? And it was a really interesting point. Somebody mentioned Adrian Beltre might have been the last one, but besides that, there weren't any. Someone mentioned Jock Peterson, but obviously, like, he was homegrown, but I wouldn't necessarily say he's like a star level. I joked that Russell Martin, if you went back, he had made a couple all-star teams at least before he went, but he made like $6 million. So it's just a fascinating thing, but the Dodgers have been set up for success at that level, that they don't need to go out and spend $30 million on a guy. Because to your credit, to your point, they might need that for Trey Turner a year from now. They might need that for Cody Bellinger a couple of years from now. They might need that for Walker Buehler a couple of years from now. Julio Urias. They've got guys that are going to start demanding that money, and they're going to need to be filling it in. You mentioned a couple guys at sort of the middle to lower tier of the market. You mentioned Canha. You mentioned Solano. Some guys I thought were interesting just to throw out, and we can do this rapid fire. I'll say a name. You tell me if you have any interest in this. The next guy on my list, again, under the assumption that the designated hitter is coming and that maybe Justin Turner can give you another year or two of serviceable defense at third base. Jorge Soler is a name on here. 3 years, $36 million. I mean, you look at this guy's StatCast page. Red is good, and it is bright red everywhere. This guy smashes the ball. 3 years, just $12 million a year. How would you feel about an addition like that? Like, should the Dodgers just go out and get an elite? Another name I have on here is Nelson Cruz, 41-year-old Nelson Cruz. 1 year, $12 million. Just DH specific guy that is going to mash. How would you feel about a guy in either of those two molds?
Yeah, I definitely think you can do that. I'd say preferably like you don't, just because I think that as we saw in the 2020 season when the Dodgers did have the DH, like I think they'd rather use it like to get guys off their feet. Like I don't think they want to have just one set DH. But I think Nelson Cruz is probably a guy you make an exception for just because he's still so good, like even at his age. And you just stick him right in the middle of that lineup. Like there's no denying that he'd be a difference maker there. So I'd say probably him over Soler, although Soler, he could play the outfield a little bit too. Like he's definitely not great out there, but it's not like in Cruz's case, like he's a DH only. Like he's not playing the field anywhere. Soler could play right fielder a little bit or left fielder or whatever. And we saw he had a really good postseason. He had a really good second half, really, and that's coming off of just an abysmal first half of the year, which is why the Braves basically got him for nothing at the trade deadline. But I don't think that a DH only should be a priority, unless I'd say Nelson Cruz is probably the guy I'd make an exception for. Like if it's a 1 year deal, we know he's a great club, like kind of similar to, he'd kind of bring what Pujols brings, where he's a great in the clubhouse. Everyone would love him, but I'd say he's still he hits hitter. A lot better than Pujols at this point.
Yeah, much better hitter, much worse fielder. Probably a tick up in the speed department. What do you think? Nelson Cruz can't be slower than Pujols running around the bases, right? Do we need to get Nelson Cruz's sprint speed? Hold on.
I'd probably be pretty close. That'd be a fun race to watch. Me and you could probably get in that race and compete as well.
100%. Let me see if I can find Nelson Cruz's sprint speed here. Oh yeah, here we go. Sprint speed. It's a guy I'm looking at here. He in the 89th percentile. That's not going to be Nelson Cruz. Nelson Cruz is not going to find himself in the 89th percentile here.
No.
Of sprint speed. I do have some other guys I want to throw at you here. Oh, come on, internet. We just want to see. Well,
it's slow. I think we all know it's slow.
Oh, here we go. Do you think? Okay, we'll play over or under 5th percentile for Nelson Cruz sprint speed. 29th percentile.
Wow.
What do you think Pujols is? Pujols has to be like somebody has to be the first percentile. It has to be Pujols, right?
Yeah. You'd think. I don't know who's slower.
Here we go. Sprint speed. Loading. 2nd percentile for Albert Pujols.
Maybe there's like a couple catchers that are
Yeah,
worse.
I don't know. I'd love to see. Somebody will do a research project and see that. Okay, let me throw some other names at you. This one is a name that will sound familiar. Kyle Seager. 2 years, $24 million is the MLB trade rumor projection. Above average defense at third base, so he kind of becomes your third baseman. Justin Turner moving primarily to a designated hitter role at that point. Slightly above average bat. StatCast not kind to him. Obviously, he came off a good offensive year. Maybe you get the Seager brothers in a package deal. I can't imagine you sign Kyle but let Corey walk, but who knows? I mean, Corey had a positive experience in LA, so maybe, but Kyle Seager, 2 years, $24 million. Any interest there?
Yeah, that you just said exactly what I was gonna say. If they're signing Corey, I'll take Kyle too. But I don't know how you sell to the fan base like, hey, we just let your favorite player go, but we signed his worst older brother.
Yeah, fair. I'm with you. I mean, I like the glove at third base. And 2 years, then maybe that gives, like, if you can sign Corey Seager and Kyle Seager, then maybe that gives you sort of, the ability to, like, slowly transition Corey over to third base as his brother plays there a couple years.
Yeah, and the more I think about it, like, if you're signing Corey, you probably don't need Kyle at that point.
Well, I mean, one thing is, like, if the Dodgers, depending on how they want to take care of it. Now, Andrew Friedman has said they have some fluidity in their financials as far as how much they can spend. Yeah. But I do wonder, like, if you were to go out and sign Corey Seager and if you were to go out and sign Kyle Seager, let's say, like, there have been rumors, like, would the Dodgers explore trading Trey Turner for a couple reasons? One is if you sign Corey Seager to a long-term deal, it all but excludes you from signing Trey Turner to a long-term deal. And Trey Turner, even though he's still on his sort of rookie contract, he's probably going to make $20 million this year. So it's not like a cheap sort of situation. So is there a scenario where you re-sign Corey Seager and Chris Taylor, or Corey Seager and Kyle Seager, or someone in that ilk, and then trade Trey Turner to open up a little bit of cap flexibility and just to sort of recoup some assets? I mean, because it's one of those things where on one hand, Trey Turner makes you much better next year and you're trying to win the World Series. On the other hand, from a long-term play, let me ask it this way. If the Dodgers signed Corey Seager and then went out and got either Chris Taylor or a Kyle Seager type, someone in the $12 to $15 million range that will be competent offensively, competent defensively, and then traded Trey Turner, would you be frustrated by that decision-making?
I mean, I guess it would depend on what you're getting back for Trey Turner. Like, if you could get an absolute haul for him, then I think you could live with it. But I also think at the same time, like, there's no one you could trade Trey Turner for and get someone who's gonna help you, win a World Series in 2022 more. Like, unless you're getting, like, I don't know, like Juan Soto or Mike Trout. But there's like that, which neither of those things are happening. So, so I just don't see how you could trade Trey Turner and get better from it. You could maybe recoup some prospects, but the Dodgers are in a window where they're trying to win. Like, and I don't know, like, guys for the future, unless you're shipping them off elsewhere.
Well, let me throw a crazy scenario at you. There's a lot of teams that are rebuilding. Would you move Trey Turner for a package of prospects that could then turn around and get you Luis Castillo?
I'd say I probably need more than just Luis Castillo. Like, if it's Luis Castillo and someone else, then yes. Just because you're getting Seager, someone else, Castillo, and then someone else too, or something. Like, I definitely think Castillo's one of the only guys you consider it for, but even him alone, like, I would not trade. I think Castillo's in the final
2 years.
year of his
He's got
deal
2
as
years
well.
left.
Okay. But I wouldn't trade Trey Turner straight up for Luis Castillo, which is kind of what you're asking. Like,
no, it's fair. It's fair. It's an interesting scenario because I'm with you. I wouldn't want to just ship Trey Turner off for prospects who aren't going to help me. But we know the Dodgers have bigger needs on the starting pitching side. The starting pitching market is not necessarily robust with young guys that you could build around. Mm-hmm. And so could you flip Trey Turner for assets that then nets you a guy who's got 2 or 3 years of control? And like you said, maybe you keep like a 100-ish level prospect plus Luis Castillo in exchange for 1 year of Trey Turner. Mm-hmm. Interesting to see how that plays out.
So let me ask you a question that's kind of similar then. Just because if let's say they do that and wind up with Castillo, then they're not. I'd say let's take Kershaw out of this. I think we both think they're going to re-sign Kershaw regardless. But if they trade for Luis Castillo, then Max Scherzer is gone. So who would you rather have? Trey Turner and Max Scherzer, or Corey Seager and Luis Castillo?
Man, that's a great question. So Trey Turner and Max Scherzer, or Corey Seager and Luis Castillo. I really like Castillo. I like that he's younger. I like that he has 2 years of team control. I've also said that I kind of prefer Trey Turner to Corey Seager, just sort of looking at the numbers and the injury history and that kind of thing. Obviously, Scherzer's arm. And so it's fascinating because on one hand, I like Castillo, I think, as an asset, maybe more than I like Max Scherzer as an asset just because of age. Yeah. Even though Scherzer is better, has been better. And on the flip side, I like Trey Turner. So that's a tough one for me.
I mean, both are pretty good options.
Yeah.
Like, if we're being
I'd be happy with either. How about that?
Yeah.
Okay, let me throw a couple more free agent names at you, and then I've got a Jim Bowden trade proposal to throw at you. Eduardo Escobar, projected to make 2 years, $20 million, a guy who could play all over the infield, above average bat, 33 years old, switch hitter. Again, StatCast doesn't love this guy, but we've seen him in the division. Again, we're talking versatility, so this would kind of be like a poor man's Chris Taylor. I think he could play all over the infield. Any interest in an Eduardo Escobar type?
Yeah. I was gonna say, like, I'd prefer Chris Taylor. Yeah. Like, if I'd rather just spend $5 million extra and get per year and get Chris Taylor. But let's say Chris Taylor gets paid somewhere else, like 4 years, $80 million, like I originally thought he would be getting. Let's say that happens, then I'd say that's not a bad, like, fallback option. That's a guy who he hits a lot of home runs, drives in a lot of runs. I know, like, the overall, like, OPS, weighted runs created, like, aren't great, but as far as, like, a bench bat utility guy who, if an injury happens, could easily step in and play every day. I like it.
And I mean, look, if you don't go after Seager, you could sign Taylor and Escobar, and Taylor could be your fourth outfielder plus second baseman, and Escobar is kind of like your third baseman, but then he can fill in at first, he can fill in at second, and so I think, and the numbers line up, right? Like you could theoretically get Chris Taylor and Escobar for $26 million a year versus going out and paying Corey Seager $30 million a year. Okay, two more names to throw at you. One, this is the name that I like the most when I look at – I always try and find who's the bottom of the barrel offensive guy that I like the StatCast stuff. I like the numbers. I like the versatility. I just see a fit. And this one's an interesting name, not a name I would have expected. He's 34 years old, and it's Tommy Pham. Here's why I like Tommy Pham. Right-handed hitter off the bench. We talked about how all of the Dodgers bench hitters currently are lefties. So he's a right-hander. He can play both corner outfield spots. The defense isn't good, but he just kind of like, from an offensive perspective, he gives you – he's probably who are we just talking about? He's better than Soler, probably, but a little bit of versatility, can fill in as your fourth outfielder. But the StatCast stuff is really good. So 95th percentile in walk rate. We know the Dodgers value stuff like that. Top 25% in exit velocity, hard hit percentage, expected weighted on base average. He's probably available for like $5 or $6 million a year for 2 years. So he would be the type of guy. Now, I don't know what his market is going to be, but if he doesn't have a, hey, we want you to be our everyday fill-in-the-blank type guy, could the Dodgers swoop in and say, we'll give you 2 years, $11 million, and you're basically going to be kind of like our fourth outfielder. You're going to kind of be the first guy off the bench. If there's a designated hitter, more opportunities. But Tommy Pham, right-handed bat, that one was interesting to me.
Yeah, I like that one. And that's what kind of when we were just talking about lineup needs, how you brought up middle infield and bench, and then I added they should probably add a right-handed outfielder as well. Like that's that'd be a perfect fit right there. Like you said, that the walk rate is high and something that kind of goes along with that. I'm pretty sure he was like right up there in pitches per plate appearance as well, which, as you said, we know the Dodgers love that type of stuff. They love to work counts. So he'd fit in well. I don't think, like, let's say you're bringing him in to be a starting outfielder. I'd be like, all right, probably not. Yeah. But if it's like your fourth outfielder, bench guy, high walk rate, has decent speed, I definitely think that's a player they should be interested in, especially at the price you said, $5 or $6 million a year. That's nothing. They just gave Andrew Heaney $8 million. So yeah, if they're looking for an outfielder on the bench, I'd probably have him, at or near the top of the list.
And it's interesting because on one hand, ideally you want to go out and sign a left-handed outfielder that can kind of platoon a little bit with AJ Pollock and just fill the need. But it's hilarious because they have a bunch of left-handed outfielders, just none of them are good. Yeah. And so on one hand, you're like, well, you have a bunch of lefties already, go get a righty. Where on the flip side, the left-hander that could take some time off of Pollock's plate is kind of what makes the most sense. One last name to throw at you in the event that Albert Pujols does not re-sign. Andrew McCutchen. Could Andrew McCutchen fill that role? Again, just turned 35, bad defensively, could still competent, I would say, out there. If we're talking about some of these other names, you could put him out in left field, and he probably wouldn't kill you. He hit 15 homers against left-handed pitching last year. He had a 107 weighted runs created plus overall. He played a bunch, so, I mean, he might not be ready. He might not be at the point in his career where he's, like, just signing a deal to be a fourth outfielder somewhere, but who knows? I mean, maybe he wants to come to a winner. Could Andrew McCutchen be a name that you'll 1 year deal, $5 million that you'd be interested in?
Yeah, at that price, absolutely. I'd say he's probably gonna make more than that. Like,
just on name value alone,
pretty good year. Like you said, like name value. Like, I don't know if he's ready to give up being an everyday player at this point, but hey, if he wants to win a ring, come on over. I've always been a huge McCutchen fan.
Anytime like with Pham and McCutchen, who are not in the top 50 free agents, I always then just drift into like, okay, the guys at the bottom seem to be making like $6 or $7 million a year, and so that's why I just say, well, if you're below them, then theoretically you would be projecting less for them. So an interesting one there. Okay, let me throw this one at you. Jim Bowden, if you're an Athletic subscriber, we all know Jim Bowden is a good source of laughs occasionally, and he does a mailbag. And somebody asked him about the A's selling everybody off. Matt Olson, one of those guys that could potentially being sold along with everybody else. I mean, it's a fire sale is sort of the vibe that you're getting. This was a proposal that Bowden suggested that the Dodgers, like, hey, if I were the Dodgers, I would offer this and blah, blah, blah. So for Matt Olson, who's got 2 years of team control left, so 2022 and 2023, he proposed Gavin Lux, Tony Gonsolin, and Phil Bickford for 2 years of Matt Olson. My immediate reaction to any Bowden trade is it's probably a bad idea. It's usually weighted one way or the other. Although when I saw this one, everybody was mad. A's fans said it wasn't enough. Dodger fans said it was too much, which makes me believe, you know what? It's probably right in the middle. It's probably a pretty fair offer. I think it comes down to what you believe about Lux and Gonsolin. We know what Bickford is. He's going to be a good, above-average relief pitcher. Probably not developing into a closer would be my guess. Probably not going back to the starting rotation either. So he's just a really good team-controlled relief pitcher. Whether you believe Gonsolin can still get into like number 3, number 4 starter, whether you believe Gavin Lux is still going to produce at a top 50 prospect level, I think is where this comes down. But what do you think about Lux, Gonsolin, and Bickford for 2 years of Matt Olson?
Yeah, I was just going to say how you feel about this trade probably depends on how you feel about Gavin Lux. Like, if you still think he's that big-time prospect who could develop into a star, then you probably say the Dodgers are giving up too much. If you're going off the numbers of the last couple of years, then you're probably like, Gavin Lux sucks. I don't want it. Like, if I'm an A's fan, why do I want that guy if we're trading our best player here? So I'm kind of with you. I'd say it's kind of in the middle. Like, that's I'd say value-wise, that's like pretty good. Like, the A's would be getting a former top prospect in Gavin Lux who still has a ton of upside. Like, he could get to that
and
star
has
level,
produced to some degree at the major league level. It's not a complete mystery.
For sure. And then you're also getting like a middle to back of the rotation type starter in Tony Gonsolin, who, when he's been healthy, like, you can look at the numbers. His numbers are really good. Like, I know when he's on the mound, like, we're not nearly as confident as the other starters the Dodgers have, but if you're just comparing numbers wise, you could put Gonsolin's numbers up with anyone and they're comparable. And then, like, you laid it out with Bickford. Like, he's a good reliever, but he's a guy the Dodgers basically found off the street and got for nothing. So it's not like they couldn't find the next Bickford if they traded for him. But I do like Bickford a lot and hope he sticks around. So I'd say value-wise, it's pretty even. I don't know. Like, if the Dodgers are going to make a trade like that, I don't know if Olson's the guy you go get. Like, you know, what are you going to make Max Muncy an everyday second baseman? I don't know. I just think there's other, like, I'd rather trade those guys for Luis Castillo personally. Like, let's go get the starter. We've talked for the last hour almost about the lineup and laid out that they're in pretty good shape. Like, I don't know if you need to start trading everyone for Matt Olson. So like, if they did it, I wouldn't be mad. Like, Matt Olson's a really good player coming off just an elite year. Like, if you look at his numbers and stick him in the middle of that lineup, it looks pretty good. But I just think, like, I'd rather go get a middle infielder or an outfielder or a starting pitcher if you're going to start trading guys. And also, like, as of now, I don't know if you could really afford to trade Tony Gonsolin at the moment. Like, this team has no starting pitching depth. We don't know what moves are to be made. Like, maybe if they go out and re-sign Scherzer and Kershaw, then they could trade Gonsolin. But as of now, he's a guy that's like, he's your third starter if the season started today, which obviously it doesn't.
And that was the point I was going to make, is I think it's a fair value, but the way this roster is constructed, the Dodgers need Gavin Lux, they need Tony Gonsolin, and they need Phil Bickford. Like, all three of those guys. Like, the reason you feel decent about the bullpen is because you have guys like Bickford. The reason that you're less desperate than you would be is because Gonsolin, you still believe, is going to be a competent Major League Baseball pitcher, and Gavin Lux is currently slotted in as your starting second baseman. I'll say this will be a bold prediction I'll make at some point more fully, but I feel like when Cody Bellinger moved to center field, I think a lot of people probably reacted the same way that they did when Gavin Lux was moved to the outfield, was just like, okay, what are we doing here? Like, but the Dodgers saw the athleticism, they saw what they thought were elite traits that could fit. I actually think that Gavin Lux has the potential to become like an elite utility player. Like, I think the bat is there. I believe the bat is going to develop. I loved what I saw from September on, and that continued into the playoffs. He was fairly competent at the plate from an on-base percentage perspective. And I just think athleticism, this is an elite sprint speed guy. We know the infield, like, he's not going to play elite defense there, but I think he can give you competent second base. I think he can give you competent shortstop. And I think he's going to develop into being a competent to above average center field, left field type guy as well. So I'm not out at all on Gavin Lux. I don't think, like, you're penciling him in as the shortstop of the future anymore. I think you have to adjust off of that. But I just think the athleticism is there. And we saw, I mean, I know the outfield stuff wasn't pretty, but there were glimpses of moments where you're like, oh my goodness, like, there aren't a ton of guys in the league that make that play And this was a guy who had spent like 2 weeks playing the outfield. So give him an entire offseason, an entire spring training to take some reps in left field, to take some reps in center field. And I think things trend up there. So for me, Olson, great, but I'm with you. Like, I wouldn't trade a starting pitcher, a middle infielder, and a reliever to go get a bat. Like, those are the three positions you need way more than the hole that Matt Olson fills.
Especially also when you still, like, if you're going to make a Matt Olson trade, why not just trade like some of your prospects and keep the major league guys? Like, I don't want to say all in, but we're definitely in a window where they're competing now. So why would you trade major league contributors for another major league contributor? Like, to me, I'd rather do that trade with prospects if you're going to do it.
Okay, last segment here as we close, which are predictions. And again, this could be about the lineup. It could be about performance. It could be whatever. I've got 2 predictions, Daniel. I'll start with my first one, and it's something that is not going to be a surprise to people that have been here. I think either Corey Seager or Trey Turner has a long-term deal in place before the 2022 season with the Dodgers, to be clear. I think they either sign Corey Seager long-term or they extend Trey Turner. I think one of those two things happens before. I thought Trey Turner's comments recently about the Dodgers and about whether the Nationals had extended him an offer were all encouraging. He doesn't strike me as the type of guy who the grass is going to be greener on the other side, et cetera, et cetera. So my first prediction is either Seager or Trey Turner is locked up long-term with the Dodgers before 2022.
I'd say I agree with that prediction. My first one, I'm going on the field here. I think not only does Cody Bellinger have a bounce back season, I say he's going to be back to his all-star form. Okay. I'm not quite going up to MVP. Not MVP yet, but I think he's going to be an all-star player for the Dodgers in 2022. We saw what he did in the playoffs. We've seen in the past, like, we know the talent is there. Like, even when he was struggling all of 2021, like, it wasn't a lack of talent issue. Like, it was mechanical stuff. It was probably a lot of it was mental. And I think he did a good job of just kind of getting over all that and putting it behind him and being productive in the postseason. So I hope he comes in to next season with that approach. Like, what we saw in the postseason was he just stopped trying to hit home runs every at bat. Like, he was slapping balls the other way. He was choking up and getting base hits when the team needed it. So I hope he comes in with that approach. I think he's going to be, healthier, obviously. Like, he's now a full year removed from the shoulder surgery. Let's hope he doesn't break his leg in the first week of the season next year. And I think he's going to have a really good season.
Yeah, I mean, all-star level for him is like hit 250 and hit 25 home runs and be the best defensive center fielder in baseball. Exactly. The bar is not like, hey, we need you to hit 300 with 40 home runs. It's like 250, 25 home runs and play elite defense, and you'll be right back there. I love it. Okay, here's my next prediction. This one might be the bolder on the bolder side. I guess I'll make 3 predictions. One is the Lux one I already mentioned, but this one is aside from Rios and aside from Beatty, I think one of that other group, that group being McKinstry, McKinney, Raley, Rex, and Noisy, I think one of those 5 guys becomes a competent, you can trust him player at the major league level. I'm not saying an everyday starter, but I think one of those guys develops into it. The sleeper for me is Sheldon Noisy. I just thought every time he was up, I know the numbers never bore it out. It just was a competent at bat. Now, I know he struck out his last 10 at plate appearances or something, so it didn't look too competent, but he is a right-handed guy off the bench, which they need. So one of Rex, Raley, McKinney, McKinstry, and Noisy. One of those 5 guys, I think, turns into a guy on the bench that you don't feel terrible about when they are due up. That's prediction number 2 for me.
Yeah, and specifically with Noisy, like, he's a guy who the Dodgers went out and traded for. Like, they gave up Adam Kolarek, who I wouldn't say has a ton of value, but he was a guy who they trusted in their bullpen. They especially liked him getting out left-handed batters. So they obviously saw something in Noisy. I know we didn't see a lot of it this past season, but I still wouldn't give up on him completely. Like you said, I wouldn't count on him to ever be an everyday starter, but as a competent bench bat, I think it's possible. And my second prediction, I'm going free agency here. I'll make a prediction there. I think the Dodgers are going to sign Donovan Solano. I kind of laid that out already, but he's a guy who was in the organization. He was a non-roster invitee in spring training, had a pretty good spring, and then went and played in AAA for a year. Obviously, Farhan and Andrew Friedman are pretty similar. Like, as soon as Farhan goes up to SF, he says, "Hey, Solano, we got a roster spot for you over here. I know you from LA." Yeah. And he's been pretty good for them. He hits lefties well, which I think is always a key with the Dodgers. That's something you're always looking for. Yeah. He could play multiple positions. He's not going to be too expensive, so I just think the fit is there. And obviously we have to see what other moves are made. Like if they go out and re-sign Corey Seager and Chris Taylor, then that probably doesn't happen. But if Corey Seager walks, and also if Chris Taylor walks, then I think that's not a bad option as far as utility guys.
Yeah. Okay. I'll throw a couple rapid fire ones. Again, one is the Lux one. I think he develops into a high end utility guy that can play competent defense all over the field. Now, part of that is dependent upon they need a second baseman right now. So it would require them signing a shortstop or a second baseman for him to have a little bit more flexibility. But I think if Chris Taylor is not back, then Gavin Lux fills into that role. My other prediction, which I think is one that you and I both share, I think the Dodgers sign either Corey Seager or Chris Taylor. I see almost no scenario where both of those guys are gone this offseason. So if we're making predictions, I would say that would be the other one. Either Taylor or Seager is back. I suppose there's a world where it's both. Again, I think that would require maybe trading Trey Turner. But I think Seager or Taylor. Any other predictions you want to throw out there before we close this one out?
No, nothing that I haven't already made. Like I'd say both of us have been consistent all offseason. Like we predicted that Corey Seager will be gone and Chris Taylor will be back. And I still feel that way. Have you changed?
No. I think I'm good on that.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I mean, I would say I think there's optimism on Seager. Like I don't think the Dodgers are just out on Seager. I think there is genuine interest. I just think, I've said before, I'll be fascinated to see how his market plays out because I think he has more question marks than Carlos Correa from an injury perspective. And so if you're big game hunting, if you're the Yankees, would you really prefer Seager over Correa? And then again, like MLB Trade Rumors thinks Trevor Story is going to be the guy that gets left holding the bag, where Correa and Seager go make $30 million plus a year, and Story's going to have to settle for $21 million a year. I think somebody settles out of those three, and so we'll see. There's a chance it could be Seager if the injury stuff is real, but Marcus Semien, the other name involved in there as well, but he's a little older, so we'll see. So anyways, that's Daniel Starkand. My name's Jeff Spiegel. We appreciate you joining us as always. This has been DodgerHeads presented by DodgerBlue.com. Check out Dodger Blue's YouTube page. Tons of great content out right now. I'm especially biased to two pieces that are up, I know for a fact. The first is an interview I did with Scott Van Slyke. Scott Van Slyke was one of my favorite guys when he was with the Dodgers. I told him, I said, Scott, we needed you. You were the guy that we needed last year. We needed the bench bat, the competent pinch hitter. That's what we needed. But great stuff there. He came up through the organization with Clayton Kershaw, Kenley Jansen. He had a great story of when Clayton Kershaw was in low A with him, straight out of rookie ball, so you'll have to check that out. Had some good insight into Kenley Jansen, his relationship with the organization, Dave Roberts as a manager, etc. So I even asked him about Yasiel Puig. I had to ask him about Puig. So that's another guy, Puig. Puig could be the fourth outfielder, Daniel. That's a tease for another video. I'm bullish on Puig. He needs to be in the league. I think the Dodger bridge has been burned, but that's a great one. And then we also have an interview with Eno Sarasep from The Athletic. He's been the guy who is high on Andrew Heaney. And so check out that interview. He explains why. Stuff Plus gets really nerdy on it, but in a way I think you'll be able to understand. So check those out. And then Daniel and I will have more of these coming out in the coming weeks. So thank you for joining us. Make sure you check out DodgerBlue.com, DodgerBlue1958 everywhere on social media. And please, please, please subscribe to the channel. Ring the notification bell. Tell your friends as well. That's Daniel. My name's Jeff. Unfortunately, we had to do away with the Vince Scully outro. Hopefully we've got a new one soon. But for now, we'll go straight to the screen. We'll see you next time.